I look at desire or intention as a force in nature, just like gravity is a force in nature, or time is a force in nature, or electromagnetism is a force in nature. I look at intent as a force in nature. Around the time of Darwin, there was a scientist by the name of Lamarck who got discredited by a lot of his contemporaries. But he was probably the first one to suggest that biological organisms particularly organized their behavior around intent. To make it simple, a giraffe has a long neck because it intends to reach that tree up there to eat that leaf. A camel has a hump because it has intent. The quantum field or the consciousness that we experience as the material expression called camel is really has the intent to navigate the desert for 7 days without water. So it develops a hump. Or a bird knows how to fly because it intends that. The biological organism creates wings. A parrot, which has the brain of the size of my less than a third of my fingernail. By the way, I hope you'll edit all this, for grammar and things like that.
Oh yes, I always do.
So, a parrot has a brain that has a size which is less than 1/3 of my fingernail. It has hardly any vocal cords. It has a beak for a mouth, but it can simulate human language and be taught to speak. How does it do that? If I was a scientist and I were to study the mechanics of that, the steps involved in that, it could take me a lifetime. And yet, through intent, the biology will organize that. So it seems, and you can study many other things, the migration habits of monarch butterflies, how homing pigeons go back to their breeding grounds. It seems like the principle behind intent is that if intent is structured from the most basic level in the field, then what happens in the field is Brahman, or you can call it the unified field, or what is beyond the quantum field. Then intent organizes its own fulfillment. And there's an expression that I learned as a child, actually, in India, and that was in the Veda itself, that intent, structured in Brahman, has infinite organizing power. And, the teaching of that is in the Bhagavad Gita, when Lord Krishna says to Lord Krishna says to Arjuna, Yogashta Kuru Karmani, established in yoga, perform action. What he's saying basically is if your intent is from that level, which means it's not overshadowed by the ego, then what happens is, and you're also detached from the result, then that intent assumes the power of the field itself, because it's not so much a personal intent as it is a universal intent. So when it applied that to our own kind of personal lives, I think intent becomes very powerful, or desire becomes very powerful, first when it comes from a level of deep silence, 2 when there is no ego involved, 3 when there is surrender to the mystery of the universe, 4 when there is detachment from the outcome, 5 where there is communion with the intelligence of the universe, and 6 when there is an attitude of defenselessness. Now these are basically the attributes of intent in the field, so that it's not really an ego-motivated, ambition-driven intent. Now, having said that, I still think that the dynamics of intent or desire for personal goals, if they were coming through this dynamic, our personal goals would be fulfilled with much more ease, with much less anxiety, because right now, the fulfillment of desire is always through ambition and exacting plans and hard work and discipline, which of course does result in the fulfillment of desire, but also brings about hypertension and heart attacks and strokes and malignancy and divorce and addictive behavior, etc., etc. Once you're in the spiritual path, though, what happens is that because the spirit is a domain of awareness where we are experiencing our universality, automatically your intent becomes less personal and more universal, so that your inner dialogue shifts from what's in it for me to how can I help.
A lot of people have the understanding in the West, or is it a misunderstanding, that Eastern philosophy involves a renunciation of desire. How do you, are we misunderstanding Eastern ideas in the West?
Not necessarily, not necessarily. It depends on who's interpreting. If you read the writings of Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, he says all enlightenment is only possible if you have the idea that, he basically says the path to enlightenment is nothing should be clung to as me or mine. Now, it depends on how you interpret that. You can interpret that as renunciation, but I know a lot of monks who live in monasteries and they haven't relinquished anything. They're reading Playboy magazine. So, the true detachment has nothing to do with whether you live in a monastery or you live in a castle. True detachment is in consciousness. And your attitude of renunciation is that you're detached from outcome, that you have surrendered to the mystery of the universe. And I also believe that as one understands that, then this renunciation is a byproduct and not a means. You see, if I am on the spiritual path and I'm experiencing my universality and experiencing my joy, and I'm experiencing my capacity to experience joy and spread it to others. I'm experiencing my ability to love and have compassion. I'm experiencing the security of knowing that I have a sense of connection to the creative power of the universe. I'm experiencing at some deep level that my life has meaning and purpose, and at the same time my desires are getting spontaneously fulfilled. Then I'm automatically ready for renunciation. It's a broad byproduct of that. But if I start out with renunciation, I'm just going to be frustrated. There's a prayer that St. Augustine had. He said, Lord, give me chastity, give me continence, but not just now.
So you say that we make things happen, although it appears as though they are happening to us. Now, does this also apply to getting sick? Do we make ourselves sick?
We participate in everything that happens to us, including our sickness, including our wellness. If, we can't have one without the other. If we say we make ourselves happy, but we don't make ourselves sad, then that would say that there's something wrong with that model. If the word responsibility literally means the ability to have a response. And my definition, at least, of responsibility, the one I was taught as a child again, responsibility is the ability to have a creative response to a challenge. That although most of us in any situation respond with a fight-flight response or a reactive response, we have other responses built into our nervous system, the intuitive response, the creative response, the visionary response, and the sacred response. So that in any moment of our lives, we have the ability to make these choices. And it is these choices that ultimately lead to the experience of health or sickness. So that, yes, when we get sick or when we have something that's happened to us, it's important to ask ourselves, what is my contribution to this process? That's the only thing I can change. If I smoke cigarettes, that's something I can change in my sickness. On the other hand, I may be getting the cancer not because I smoke cigarettes, but everybody else around me does, and the environment is completely contaminated. Well, even there, I have some degree of participation. I have the choice to be in that environment or possibly not. You might say, what about this child that's born, and 2 years into childhood gets leukemia? Well, in the Vedic scheme, life is not squeezed into the volume of a body or the span of a lifetime. it spans eternity.